Dear Biker, I've been scared and embarrassed for years, but I don't care anymore. Stumbling onto your channel, it was like an enormous weight had been lifted off my chest. For so long now, I felt crazy, like I'd imagined the entire thing. But now I see that there are others who've experienced the unexplainable. I still don't know what I saw that night, camping there in the land between the lakes in western Kentucky. And I don't even know if it belongs to your channel, but this is the only place I feel that I can finally share what happened that weekend. I'm using a throwaway email because several friends know my YouTube account. I've seen that sidelong glance, the one that people give you when you tell them something strange. They don't believe you, but they're too polite to say so. I just can't stand that look. It's the main reason that I never talk about it anymore. This happened over 20 years ago. My dad was an avid bow hunter, and though I wasn't a hunter myself, I loved camping. And we used several formal campsites. We'd drive the trade, turn off on a side road, and then camp near a creek bed, usually dry or just a trickle. There we'd pitch the tent, tarp it, and Dad would head off to hunt while I hiked, read, or just relaxed. Well, on that particular morning, there was a chill in the air and the smell of wet leaves. Anyone who's gone camping in the fall knows that smell. Dad had left early, and I sat whittling on a hickory staff before heading out for a morning hike. I followed the creek for a while, not directly along it, but close. I knew this area well. I'd grown up nearby, and the woods were like home to me. Cresting a small hill, I heard rustling. I figured it was just squirrels, but the sound grew heavier, deeper, like trees being shaken by something large. It seemed to come from every direction, and then it seemed to focus ahead of me. Trees in the distance were shaking violently, but I couldn't see anything that could be causing it. I felt fear then for the first time in those woods. Not panic, mind you, just fear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the shaking stopped. Everything went still, not quiet exactly, but absent. The silence seemed to have a weight to it. And that's when I saw her. A slim, dark figure on the ridge ahead. I couldn't see her face or any detail, but I knew it was a woman. I don't know why, I just did. I thought maybe she had seen what I had. So I started moving toward her. But as I moved, she slid away, keeping just barely visible through the trees. Slid is the right word. Her stride covered impossible distance, smooth and wrong. She looked human-sized, normal even, but she covered ground like she was gliding. I followed her down a hill, through the thin fog until I came to a clearing. The light dimmed, like a cloud had passed over, although the sky was clear. That same unnatural stillness was there again. But now something else caught my attention. There was no smell. Anyone who spent time in the woods knows there's always a smell. Damp earth, pine, decaying leaves, or stagnant water. Always something, but here there was nothing. No scent at all, and that absence made me stop. And that's when I saw her again, across the clearing, facing me this time. She looked ordinary. So ordinary, in fact, that I can't remember a single feature except her smile. And when she smiled, I ran. I can't exactly explain why, but that smile just felt wrong. I ran until the light returned and the smells of the forest came back. I looked behind me, and she was there, closer, and I could feel her smiling, even when I couldn't see it. I sprinted back to camp, dove into the tent, and cried until my dad returned. I didn't tell him what happened. By nightfall, I'd half convinced myself that I had imagined the whole thing, but later on that night, stepping out to relieve myself, that stillness fell again. And then I saw two reddish lights moving between the trees, eyes descending the hill toward the camp. I felt her presence again, that same cold awareness. I ran back to the fire, yelling for my dad. He didn't respond. He just sat there staring into the flames. I shook him, terrified, and realized that I couldn't smell the smoke anymore. Not the wood, not the air, nothing. It was like the world had stopped existing. I screamed and I shook him harder. And then suddenly, sound and smell came rushing back. The fire crackled and my dad blinked like he had just woken up. He asked what the hell I was yelling about. And well, when I told him, he just gave me that look. You know the one. The one that says, "Are you okay?" We left the next morning. I barely held it together until we got home. And when I reached my room, I broke down. Not from shame, but relief. I knew without a doubt that if I hadn't reached my dad, I would have wandered off into those woods, just like I would have that morning, following her into the clearing. She wanted me in that place where nothing smelled and nothing lived. I don't ever want to know what would have happened if I'd gone. I've camped and hiked plenty since then, but never again have I felt that same stillness. Yet every time the woods go quiet, I still get scared. Thank you for letting me share this. It's haunted me for more than 2 decades. Signed, Anonymous. Dear Tattooed Biker, this story was told to me by my dad. First and foremost, my father didn't believe in aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, or portals, but what happened that night he could never explain away. Now, he was an avid coon hunter, owned several dogs, and had a lot of friends who hunted with him. This happened sometime in the 1960s. Well, one night, he and a buddy took their dogs out for a late run. There's a small conservation area about 5 miles from our old house. Primitive campsites, picnic tables, a spring running through it. Simply beautiful country. Well, they let the dogs out and sat on the tailgate, listening to them run. Before long, the dogs had treed a coon. So the men walked in where they were baying. Now, these dogs were well trained. Once they treed, well, they stayed until my dad got there. He said they got the dogs leashed up and had just started back toward the truck when the dogs suddenly began whining and whimpering, acting completely out of character. His big male hound suddenly cowered, broke free, and then bolted. And that's when they heard it. A noise like nothing either of them had ever heard before, and both men had spent their lives in the Missouri woods. It was a deep, growling sound, followed by heavy footsteps encircling them. They swung their headlights around, trying to spot whatever it was, but it kept just out of the light. And then came a kind of chattering, like it was talking to itself, while it moved around them in the dark. My dad drew the pistol that he always carried and fired a few shots into the air. Instantly, everything stopped. No growling, no footsteps, no chattering. Just heavy silence. They wasted no time getting back to the truck, and my dad's runaway hound was already there, waiting and trembling. All of the dogs were cowering with their tails tucked, shaking like leaves. They loaded them up and they got the hell out of there. And that's when they noticed something else. Over 2 hours were gone. The tree where the dogs had bayed wasn't that far from the truck. Maybe 30 to 45-minute round trip at most, but somehow more than 2 hours had passed and neither man could explain it. They never told anyone except each other. My dad didn't even share it with me until I was grown. And after he passed, I asked Mom if he'd ever told her. She said yes, that he had come home that same night, pale and shaken, and she could tell that he was genuinely scared. And my dad was never afraid of anything, but that night, whatever was out there in those woods, growling, chattering, and circling, shook him to his very core. Thanks for reading. Signed, Davy. Hey Biker, I'm fairly new to your channel, but I'm not new to the Unexplained. I've been fascinated with strange stories ever since I first heard David Paulides on a podcast years ago. And that's when I fell down that whole rabbit hole. It's become a quiet little hobby for me, keeping an open mind and listening to others' encounters with the unknown. If it's all right, I'd like to share some of mine. You see, I grew up in the rural mid-Atlantic, not far outside of Baltimore, Maryland. Our home, and the one next to it, sat on a hill. 2 tenant houses built in the early 1800s for an old plantation. Across the road stretched a wide cornfield, and beyond that, the original plantation house. Behind our homes was a small patch of woods, maybe 10 to 15 acres, surrounded by farmland and rolling hills. 2 neighbors told me stories about what they called the wild men and the forest folk. The wild men, they said, were huge, bipedal creatures, covered in hair with an awful stench and an unnatural howl. They traveled through the fog. That was their calling card. The fog and, well, the smell. These wild men were dangerous, but afraid of humans. More like a black bear might be. You could hear their heavy, stomping feet as they fled, but no one ever called them Bigfoot back then. Now the forest folk, they were different. They were spoken of by our elderly neighbor, a sweet woman and a lifelong gardener. Her yard was a wonderland, with flowers, vines, trellises, and tiny stone paths. She was a devout Christian, but she still left offerings for her forest folk. Offerings of bread, fruit, shiny stones. She'd show me exactly where so I wouldn't disturb them. She said, they're the spirits of the woods, mostly invisible, but sometimes they appeared as animals, or as faint, shimmering shapes up in the trees. She described them exactly like the predator when it's cloaked, bending the light around itself. She told me, if you ever see the forest folk as an animal, you're in their good graces, but if you see only their shape, well, it's time to leave. She said I'd know when that time came because I'd feel an overwhelming fear that would make me run without even thinking. The woods behind our house, they were my playground. A spring-fed creek ran through them. There were mushroom rings, little hills, and rocky patches. Nothing dangerous, it was just enough to explore. The first time I saw what I believe was a forest folk, I was about 8 years old. I was playing near the edge of the trees when I heard frantic movement up on the hill. Branches snapping, leaves thrashing. I looked up and I saw a shape running fast through the woods. It was human-sized and bipedal, but blurred, almost see-through. It wasn't running towards me, more to the side, maybe 100 feet away. Then it hit the tree line where the corn started, and I watched the stalks bend and part as it vanished. I stood there frozen until it was gone, and then I ran home crying. It all happened so fast, but I can still remember that feeling. Pure fear deep in my chest. My backyard never felt the same again. After that, the dreams started. I'd see that same shape at the edge of the woods, but in my dreams it would become clear. Sometimes human and sometimes animal. There were often several of them, and they'd guide me deeper into the trees, but these dreams weren't nightmares. They were peaceful, even comforting. On foggy mornings, my whole family would hear howls coming from the woods. Low, mournful bellows. Not foxes, not dogs. And we all heard them. Even our family dog would stand rigid on the porch, watching the trees. My sister and I talked about it recently, and she said, I totally forgot about those. It's like I wanted to forget them. Those fogs were always thickest around our house. The farm kids down the road used to joke that our woods were haunted because they never got fog when we did. I kept exploring those woods all through my childhood and into high school. And as I got older, the fear never left, but my curiosity grew stronger. Sometimes I'd walk the wood, calling out softly, asking them to show themselves. And sometimes they did. I'd catch a glimpse of that shimmering distortion, like heat rising off the pavement. And every time I did, I'd feel that same distinctive fear. But the second I crossed back into the open field, it would vanish, leaving me calm again. The day before we moved, I stood at the tree line and I said goodbye. It felt right to thank the woods. They'd given me fear and wonder, and the neighbors had taught me to respect them. As I stood there, a rabbit darted out of the brush and stopped right at the edge, watching me. I thanked it, and then looked up and saw faint shapes, 3 or 4 of them, about 30 feet in. That was the last time I ever saw the forest folk, and this time I wasn't afraid. I smiled, waved, and then walked to my car. Signed, Caitlin.
He's got skulls on his arms, flames on his chest, rides a steel horse, won't ever rest. Chasing whispers through the foggy pines, searching for truths that slip through time. Moonlight bends where he rolls, the shadows speak. They've got souls, inking shadows, leather and lore. He's knocking on the other world's door. Bigfoot's howl, dog man's glare, men in black just vanishing there. Inking shadows, truth to find, paranormal trails in his mind.